An employee completes their mandatory corporate training. They click through the modules, take the final exam, and pass with a perfect score. Then they return to their desk and continue making the exact same mistakes they made before the training. Take the case of Satya. During his annual appraisal, Satya's supervisor flagged his time management skills. To correct this, Satya was assigned a self-paced online module specifically on time management. Satya took the assignment seriously. He scored a 98% on the online assessment, yet his actual ability to manage his time on the job improved by exactly 0%. To figure out why, Satya broke down the actual questions he was asked. The module tested his ability to identify time wasters and recognize best practices. It measured his ability to recall information, but it never tested his ability to actually manage a schedule. A near-perfect assessment score provides zero evidence of skill acquisition if the tool used to measure it aligns with the wrong cognitive domain. This chart outlines the ADDIE model, the framework used by instructional designers. The final phase, highlighted here, is evaluate. This step has a dual mandate. It must judge the performance of the learner, and it must judge the effectiveness of the instructional material itself. To evaluate correctly, we have to distinguish between two types of knowledge. Declarative knowledge consists of facts, concepts, and principles. It is information that simply needs to be known or understood, like recalling the stages of a workflow. Procedural knowledge addresses how to perform a task. It requires the learner to execute a process, produce a tangible output, or solve a physical problem. Satya's test failed because of a structural mismatch. The training aimed to change overt procedural behavior, but it attempted to measure that behavior by forcing it through a flat, multiple-choice filter. An assessment only produces valid data when its architectural design mirrors the specific cognitive intent of the learning objective. The term evaluation is often used as a catch-all, but it actually contains two distinct mechanisms that serve entirely different purposes: formative and summative assessments. Formative assessment is an assessment for learning. This visual loop demonstrates how it works. By requiring the learner to retrieve information from memory, the assessment itself strengthens the neural connections. The goal is to provide descriptive feedback to the learner while they are still forming the concept. This works through a mechanism called effortful retrieval. Asking a learner to supply a missing word in a fill-in-the-blank question requires high cognitive friction. This transfers information to long-term memory far more effectively than simply tapping a recognized answer in a multiple-choice list. Summative evaluation operates completely differently. It is the assessment of learning. It acts as a static, periodic checkpoint, like a midterm exam or an end-of-year report card. Its primary audience is often outside the daily learning environment, designed to report compliance to HR divisions, administration, or school boards. Formative assessments build the cognitive muscle through practice and feedback. Summative assessments weigh that muscle at the end of the line. Using a summative tool when a learner actually needs formative practice breaks the instructional design. When designing declarative objective questions like MCQs, strict constraints apply. You must strip out words like always, never, and only from your distractors. Alert learners recognize these absolutes as false flags and use them to game the test. You must also ensure that keywords present in the question stem do not appear in the correct answer alternative, which tips off the learner and bypasses actual recall. Assessing procedural knowledge, how to actually do a task, requires completely different tools. Because procedural knowledge involves visible, overt behavior, it must be observed in realistic or simulated workplace settings over time. To measure this reliably, we use observation tools. Checklists are binary. They record a simple yes or no to ensure that a learner performs a sequence of specific tasks without skipping a step until it becomes a habit. If a task requires evaluating the degree of proficiency, a checklist is useless. For that, you deploy rating scales and rubrics. These are non-binary tools that expand to define exact criteria for the quality, frequency, and nuance of a work product. True learner capability can only be captured when the measurement tool matches the exact parameters of the cognitive domain being tested. Even a perfectly formatted rubric or multiple-choice question is worthless if it lacks scientific validation. Take a look at this graph plotting test consistency. This illustrates reliability, a test's ability to measure the same thing consistently over time. If a candidate takes a test today and gets a similar score next month, the test has high reliability.
We represent this with an R correlation coefficient between 0 and 1.00. But consistency isn't enough. Look at this cluster of arrows. They hit the target in a tight, reliable group, but they miss the center. This represents validity, the extent to which a test measures what it claims to measure. A test full of recall questions designed to measure real-world application is invalid. Next is the difficulty index. You calculate this by dividing the number of students who selected the correct answer by the total number of students who took the test. If the resulting value is 0.75 or higher, the test item is considered easy. If it drops to 0.25 or below, the item is difficult. Finally, the discrimination index proves how effectively an assessment separates high-performing candidates from low-performing ones. In a good test, high scorers will select the correct answer for a specific item more often than low scorers. If a test item yields a negative discrimination index, meaning low performers get it right more often than experts, that item must be thoroughly analyzed, corrected, or completely purged from the system. Measured reliability, validity, and discrimination indices are the only things separating actual proof of learning from statistical noise. Once you establish validity at the level of the individual exam, you have to zoom out. In a corporate environment, L&D professionals must measure the effectiveness and business impact of the entire organizational training intervention. This 4-tier pyramid represents Donald Kirkpatrick's evaluation model, the industry standard for measuring that impact. It builds from the bottom up, starting with Level 1, how the learners initially reacted to the training. The formative and summative assessments we discussed slot directly into Level 2, learning. This measures exactly how much knowledge increased as a direct result of the course. The procedural observation tools, the rubrics, rating scales, and checklists govern Level 3, behavior. This evaluates how trainees apply what they learned in actual workplace situations. Everything culminates in Level 4, program results. This tier measures the final, macro-level outcomes for the organization, usually quantified as return on investment, like a 10% increase in overall productivity. Proving ROI to an executive board is mathematically impossible without the structural foundation of valid behavioral and declarative assessments supporting it from below. Corporate organizations constantly demand Level 4 ROI data, but isolating the training variable from the broader business environment is an inherently difficult task. Organizations generate constant operational noise. When productivity goes up, it is incredibly challenging to prove whether that increase came from the training module, a new software rollout, a change in team configuration, or a shift in management. There is also the reality of soft data. Effective training produces outcomes like improved employee morale, reduced workplace conflicts, and better teamwork. These are critical intangibles that resist pure monetary valuation. Because the macro results are so difficult to isolate, the integrity of the entire evaluation system relies entirely on your diligence at the micro level. The rigor applied to multiple choice distractors, observational rubrics, and validity indices is the only thing protecting the data. True instructional design does not end when the content is delivered. It ends when a mathematically sound, perfectly aligned assessment proves that actual transformation occurred.